USDA logo, United States Department of Agriculture.
Get started if that's okay with everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the USDA National Agricultural Library Zoom room. We'll get started with our welcome from Director Mr. Paul Wester momentarily, but first I want to go over just a couple quick items. Today's event will be recorded. We will, if we use the video, we will edit out any Q&A and people's names and stuff like that. I'm going to move on to the next slide, but this, mostly the guest speaking portion is what will be recorded. We won't be recording the Wikipedia editing training later. And like I said, we will edit out people's names. However, feel free to rename yourself if you wish. The text of this slide will be in the chat if you wish to read it more closely. And this is going to be our schedule for the day. We'll first be hearing from our director, Paul Wester, and then our keynote speaker, the Reverend Dr. Heber Brown III, Senior Pastor, Pleasant Hope Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland, and founder of the Black Church Food Security Network. And we'll also be hearing from Laurie Beyranevand, Director of the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law School. Later today, we'll do some Wikipedia editing training, and we'll be doing the editing articles related to food equity and food systems. However, please feel free to come and go as you wish. You don't need to stay for the full day. If you just wish to stay for the speakers, that's absolutely fine. And now, once again, I'd like to introduce Mr. Paul Wester, Director of the National Agricultural Library, who will be giving us our welcome and introducing our speakers. Paul?
All right. Thanks so much, Jamie. I appreciate it. And hello and welcome to everyone to our online event, Advancing Equity Through Food and Nutrition. I'm glad you're able to join us today. As Jamie said, I'm Paul Wester. I'm the director here at the National Agricultural Library in sunny but cold Beltsville, Maryland. And I'm here in the office today. The National Agricultural Library, or NAL for short, was established with the creation of the Department of Agriculture back in 1862 and is one of 5 national libraries in the United States. NAL is also part of the USDA's Agricultural Research Service, the major intramural research arm of the USDA. And we also serve here at the National Ag Library as the departmental library for USDA. We hold one of the world's largest and most extensive agriculture and food science related collections, both in physical and digital form. Serving USDA scientists and administrators, researchers, and the public, the National Agricultural Library facilitates the creation of agricultural knowledge through the acquisition, curation, and dissemination of agricultural information in all of its forms. As I said, digital, electronic, and whatever is going to come next. Today's event on advancing equity through food and agriculture is organized by the Agricultural Law Information Partnership. The partnership represents a collaboration between the National Agricultural Library, the National Agricultural Law Center, and the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at the Vermont Law School. The partnership connects consumers, producers, and legal professionals with agricultural and food law information that they need to support and ensure the success of all forms of American agriculture. Today's event will focus on systemic inequity in food systems and the work being done to address those inequities. Our speakers will highlight opportunities available to address these inequities and in turn create more just and equitable food systems. Today, we have 2 great speakers, 2 great guest speakers for you. First, we will hear from our keynote speaker, the Reverend Dr. Heber Brown III, a community organizer, social entrepreneur, and senior pastor of the Pleasant Hope Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland. The Reverend Brown founded Orita's Cross Freedom School and the Black Church Food Security Network, which advances health, wealth, and power by helping African-American congregations establish gardens on church-owned lands and partner with Black farmers. It's an honor to have the Reverend Dr. Brown with us today, so I'm very glad you're with us today. Second, we will hear from Laurie Beyranevand, the professor of law and director of the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at the Vermont Law School. And I believe it is colder there where she is than it is here in Beltsville. She will highlight the center's project entitled A Blueprint for National Food Strategy, which examines the potential for developing a cohesive and equitable national food strategy here in the United States. Our speakers will explain the complex issues that create inequities in our national food systems. They will also introduce valuable resources and examples that demonstrate how community-led efforts can address food system issues. Again, we're so pleased to have the Reverend Dr. Brown and Professor Beyranevand here with us today. Now, I would like to say a few words about the value of this afternoon's Wikipedia editing session. As it may be obvious to all of you, Wikipedia is where the world goes to get its information, at least initially. Wikipedia is one of the top 10 internet sites that's visited daily from users all around the world, and Wikipedia is accessed by over 1 billion unique users each month. To make this resource work and be effective, Wikipedia relies on volunteer editors and programs like this edit-a-thon to create reliable information, improve existing articles and related content, and reliably fill gaps in basic knowledge. Over the past 3 years here at the National Ag Library, we've hosted edit-a-thons related to a number of topics, including agricultural history, USDA Women in Science, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and most recently, heirs property rights. We have also increased agricultural information on the site by building community support to update articles about food and agriculture laws and regulation, and the USDA itself, particularly Agricultural Research Service activities, projects, and people. In addition, we've added resources from the National Agricultural Library's collection, working directly with USDA scientists like Dr. Gary Kennard to revamp agriculture-related content specifically related to the National Plant Germplasm System, excuse me. Through editing, we help ensure that the public has access to quality, accurate information in the place they are most likely to look for it first. Our morning session will include a question and answer session, and we will end around 12:15. If you are planning to attend part 2 of our event, please return by 1 p.m. Following the lunch break, Jamie Flood, who you met earlier, who is also our Wikipedian in residence here at NAL, will host a brief Wikipedia editing training, followed by a group editing time, which will run until about 3 p.m. I should also note that while we hope you'll join us for the full day's events, you should feel free to come and go. And Jamie had outlined that earlier in her initial remarks. So again, welcome everyone. I'm excited to see all the work that's going to be inspired by today's events, particularly our keynote speaker this morning. So without further ado, I welcome the Reverend Dr. Heber Brown III, the senior pastor of Pleasant Hope Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland, and the founder of the Black Church Food Security Network. So take it away, Reverend Dr. Brown.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that introduction. And I'm glad you're down here in Beltsville and I'm in Baltimore. So we're both quite cold on today. Glad I'm not in this by myself. Thank you all so very much for the invitation to be a part of this event and to share a little bit about the Black Church Food Security Network in context around food inequity and other topics that have been mentioned prior to me beginning. And I'd like to, let me see, I'm gonna share my screen here. And as I'm sharing, this is so cool to have so many of you on the line at one time. I am not alone, I would believe in saying that all of us have had bouts of Zoom fatigue, but look at you, more than 100 of you are on the line right now. And I'm really excited to be with you today. And I'm going to share, here we go, a little bit about the Black Church Food Security Network. My presentation is entitled, It's Always Been Bigger Than Food, Black Churches and Food Sovereignty in Context. I'll start with this history, a little bit of history. I want to start with agriculture in the context of African culture. Agriculture began to expand in West Africa around 3000 BCE. And around this time, so much of what cultures and communities in West Africa anchored themselves in is not only a closeness to the land, not only the production of foodstuffs for their well-being and nourishment, but also the music, the spirituality, the cultural identity, it was all kind of mixed in together as agriculture spread throughout West Africa at this time. And as it spread throughout West Africa with music, production, dance, song, culture, it became a part of the DNA and the identity of so many communities of this part of the world. I found this really cool video online that kind of gives a picture of how West African societies saw the connection between agriculture, production, culture, music, and spirit. And I'd like to share just, I think it maybe about 60 seconds, a little bit more, but check this out. These are African women in West Africa who are going about their work of farming, but doing it in such a way that would make me want to join them in their farming all day. Take a look at this. Okay, I'm about to start dancing, so I'll stop there. But I hope you see how this long tradition of music and spirituality and farming and land and community is all together, not just about production, but about what it means to be a part of the community, what it means to be connected, what it means to have well-being emotionally. Can you imagine the emotional, relational, psychological, and spiritual benefits of being side by side with your neighbors and those in your community and growing food in this way and farming together and being this close to land? That's why a part of why I say it's always been bigger than food. Not just production, but about who we are and who has African identity in West Africa with agriculture, how it all blended together. And of course, the world took notice of the agricultural genius coming out of West Africa and all that came along with that. And because in part of that, Europeans enslaved Africans and brought them to the fields of the Americas. Now, it was important for me to start with West African culture and history because, and I'm so glad this is a Wikipedia-thon and being a part of this effort, because maybe you can help to expand the lens and broaden the perspective that the histories of Black people in relationship to farming and agriculture does not start with slavery. Can somebody please make that a part of an entry somewhere? Do some study and research. Y'all all are super smart. Y'all smarter than me. Somebody dig up the research and make sure that that gets included, because I think it's very important that we recognize that the enslavement of African people is not the starting point of African people's experience with land. In fact, it was because of the genius and insight and ingenuity of African growers and farmers that they were even on the radar of enslavers to be kidnapped, brutalized, and dragged to the Americas for enslavement in the context of this country. And so I think it's very important that we broaden the context, as I said in my title. This slide is on the screen because at the tail end of the Civil War in this country, the man on the screen, and I know this is not school or anything, but if I was to do a pop quiz, somebody might know that the man on this screen, his name is General William Sherman, General William T. Sherman. It's very important because in the waning days of the Civil War, as the lands of Confederates were being confiscated, those lands went alongside a growing number of now formerly enslaved African people who were looking for land and a home. It was General William T. Sherman who issued Special Field Order number 10. And with that special field order, he from land from South Carolina down to Florida. He said this 400,000 acre tract of land will be proportioned up in 40-acre plots, and each of the families that are now formally enslaved will get a 40-acre plot so that they can begin their own lives on their own terms with land. This is where 40 acres and a mule comes from. This is the context of 40 acres and a mule. Some of you know that this promise of land for formerly enslaved Africans did not come to full fruition because a year after Special Field Order was issued by General Sherman, President Johnson rescinded it. And that's why so many people today, and you've heard over the years, people talk about, we never got out 40 acres and a mule. This is the context for that. It's very important to, again, look at the ways in which land and dispossession have been a part of the story of African people for some time. It did not stop with the end of the Civil War and 40 acres and a mule, but it continued as well, because post-Civil War, there were 15 million acres of land owned by formerly enslaved Africans. But then by 1920, 925,000 Black-owned farms were in this country, 14% of all farms in the United States. Fast forward 55 years, and now we have 45,000 Black-owned farms. Do y'all see that drop? From 925,000 Black-owned farms to 45,000 Black-owned farms by 1975. And today, it's estimated that 1% of the nation's rural landowners are African Americans. And let me correct, I'm sorry, I think I said Special Field Order 10 is Special Field Order 15. I know y'all Wikipedia, y'all got to get it right on Wikipedia. Special Field Order 15 was issued by General William Sherman. But you see this steep decline of Black-owned lands in this country. The graphic says Black land loss, but sometimes I like to say Black land theft, because the land was not lost, it was taken. How, do you ask? Good question. Here are some of the contributing factors to the steep decline of Black land ownership. Pervasive federal discrimination, state and local structural dispossession, tax sales, partition sales, and the like, heir property conflicts, migration, sometimes and many times forced migration, lack of access to legal services, domination of the industrial agricultural program and paradigm, and racial terrorism all contributed to the massive Black land theft in this country. This woman on the screen, Fannie Lou Hamer, is oftentimes remembered by saying the phrase, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." But if we broaden the lens in the context of her life, we'll see that she also was very active on the front of food justice before there was even such a common term. Fannie Lou Hamer said this, and I read it aloud just for those who may not be able to be on the screen. Fannie Lou Hamer said, "Food is used as a political weapon, but if you have a pig in your backyard, if you have some vegetables in your garden, you can feed yourself and your family and nobody can push you around." She was making the connection that it's not just about food. It's about having agency over one's own life and about a community having the self-determination to dictate their own destiny. She understood it that way. And there's a very real historical example of what Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer was saying in this quote. Here's a picture of a memo I saw when I went down to the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum. I think one of the best museums that I've ever attended on civil rights history. And on the wall, there's a plaque and a picture of this memo from the mayor of Birmingham at the time in 1962. He said a little over a week ago, the Negroes of Birmingham began a boycott against the downtown merchants. These merchants have always done business with the Negroes on a fair and equitable basis, with no discrimination whatever being shown in their dealings, and always applying the same rules of service and credit. These merchants are innocent of any wrongdoing and are being unjustly penalized. The city of Birmingham, in cutting off its contributions to the surplus food program, is demonstrating to the Negro community who their true friends and benefactors are. If the Negroes are going to heed the irresponsible and militant advice of the NAACP and core leaders, then I say, let these leaders feed them. For in excess of 90% of the recipients of the free food handouts are Negroes. This is April 4th, 1962. When I saw this on the wall at that museum, I stopped in my tracks. This is a food charity program for the city where 90% of the recipients are African-American. And because of the strivings of the Black community at that time to experience greater degrees of justice, equity, and fairness in their community, the mayor decided to cut the funds to the food charity program. This helps me to understand that it can be quite precarious to be utterly and overly reliant on charity for something that I believe is a basic human right. We see the limits of charity in an action like this. As good as charity can be, to be fully dependent leaves historically marginalized communities in jeopardy if that benevolence someday is withdrawn, and then that community is left without the support that they need. This is why, while I celebrate and I'm grateful for food charity and even food access, again, as my title said, it's got to be bigger than food all by itself. So a number of religious groups started to organize because they saw the same thing that I just said, that we cannot be utterly reliant and dependent on food charity alone. Father Divine, Mother Divine, and the Peace Mission movement in the early 1900s, around the 1920s and 1930s, they launched their ministry, and farming and food was a major part of their ministry. They bought farmland in the rural parts of New York, upstate New York, and kept their churches and religious groups in the cities. And they began to grow food out in the suburbs and the rural communities and transport it into the cities. They had their own grocery stores. They had these lavish feasts that they would have all the time. And all of this was happening in the context of the Great Depression. So you had this church growing food, transporting food, selling it at low cost or absolutely free, and holding meals for their community. It was a powerful witness to what religious groups can do, particularly in times of social and political upheaval. Father and Mother Divine aren't the only ones. This is a picture of a man named Marcus Garvey in the left side of your screen. Some of you have heard that name, Marcus Garvey. He's the one that launched the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And when you think about Marcus Garvey, a lot of people just think about Back to Africa. And yes, that was a major part of their program. He believed that Black people needed to go back to Africa because we would never be treated fairly and with equity in the country. But he was clear that not every Black person was going to go back to Africa. So one of the things they tried to do, and they did do here, was establish a farm. They established a farm. It was called Liberty Farm in Oregonia, Ohio. I don't even think that town exists anymore. I'm going to drive through the ghost town one day and just look at it. But I just thought it was so cool that even this Black militant organization recognized that agriculture and food is very important to ideas of freedom and equity as well. Reverend Vernon Johns is another religious leader who saw agriculture and farming as important to advancing equity in the Black community. Not only was he a preacher, but he was a farmer. He grew up in Virginia on a farm. And also, one of the things I love about Reverend Vernon Johns is the legend goes that he would farm in the morning on Sundays and then come to church and preach in his farm boots and overalls. After church, he would sell watermelon and other things that he had grown on the front porch of the church, much to the chagrin of his high cotton deacons who wanted to get away from this idea of Black people and farming. Reverend Vernon Johns was saying, no, don't leave the land, don't leave farming. We need to do it differently. And if our free forced labor can enrich an economy in the country that we're still feeling injustices from, what can our willing labor do to build up our own community? Check out what he says in his book, Human Possibilities. I'll read it quickly. He says, urban and rural Negroes working together could control the production of their elemental necessities on the farm and become merchants of those in the city. It is apparent also that several new avenues to employment would be opened by this enterprise. Again, back to my title, it's always been bigger than food. Farming and food and employment and self-reliance and self-respect and dignity has always been a part of this particular tradition of asset-based community development and farming in this Black tradition. I'm gonna keep on going with religious communities, and here's another one, the Nation of Islam. Did you know this? That Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam were very much so active and involved with farming as well? In fact, Elijah Muhammad said the farm is the engine of our national life. They bought 5,000 acres of land in Georgia. And even on the cover of the newspaper for their denomination, for their religious community, Muhammad Speaks, farming was all over their paper. These are pictures of the covers from 1968, the 1950s. They have been talking about farming and food and even importing fish and other items well in advance of the more popular civil rights actions around legislation and the like. I thought it was pretty cool as a part of the agricultural history too. Let's keep moving. Now, Black Panthers. What's the first image that comes to your mind? I got it, don't even tell me. Shotguns and berets and leather jackets. Yes. But it's bigger than that. Let's widen the lens. The Black Panthers were the ones that started free breakfast programs in this country. It was one of the things that they were known for, providing free food to children, because they believed if children did not eat before they went to school, then their ability in the classroom would be severely hampered without the nutrition that they needed. And I believe that this part, and I'm glad a number of authors and documentarians are already on it, but I believe that this part of the work of the Black Panthers is very important when we're talking about the history of advancing equity in the food system. You can't tell the whole story if we overlook the ways that grassroots organizations attempted to do this work. Finally, in the historical standpoint, Reverend Albert Clegg and the Shrine of the Black Madonna, they bought nearly 4,000 acres of land in Western South Carolina that their church and denomination still own to this day, Beulah Land Farms. I'll be there in a couple of weeks. It's primarily a cattle farm right now, but they're growing out their vegetable production area. Reverend Albert Clegg believed, like all the other persons I put on the screen, that Black churches had an opportunity to advance equity in the food system by utilizing their organized people and resources to reach out for those aims. And so this is what I did, y'all. In 2015, after growing food at my church here in Baltimore for 5 years and seeing its benefits, I swam upstream. I studied. I'm a book nerd, y'all. Black Nerds Unite. I'm a nerd. And so I went to the footnotes of all of these stories, of these histories that I've shared with you, and so much more. I looked at our church's experience growing food on 1,500 square feet of our front yard and all the things that came about that was like almost magical in my church. And I said, what if we could get more churches growing food on their land and then getting these churches to work together to create and co-create some type of systemic response to food insecurity in our community? And with that, in 2015, the Black Church Food Security Network was born. What are we doing? Good question. We're co-creating Black-led food ecosystems anchored by Black churches in partnership with Black farmers and accomplices. I'm gonna speed up here because my time is on me. This is what I'm thinking about, y'all. Churches have all this stuff that Monday through Saturday kind of just sits there, underutilized or completely left alone. What am I talking about? Good question. Parking lots, kitchens, even commercial kitchens, land, churches. The Black church community is the largest landowner in Black America. It needs to be a part of the conversation about how we advance equity. Church buses. There's a whole fleet of Black church buses across the country sitting on parking lots, and then fellowship halls and multi-purpose rooms. All of this is right there and a part of my life's purpose. I know why I'm here, y'all. A part of my life's purpose is to help churches reimagine the use of what they already own to advance equity in the food system, promote health, and provide economic opportunity for historically marginalized groups. Check this out. If you take a snapshot of the African-American Christian denominations in the country, these are some of the major Christian denominations, and here are their membership numbers. If you can organize a fraction of the members of these Black Christian denominations that go back as early as the late 1700s to now, then you're doing something to really advance equity in the food system. The Black Church Food Security Network goes about its work in a number of programs. I'm going to lift up just 3 quick ones. Operation Higher Ground. We go to churches and we help them start gardens on their land and provide them resources, technical support, and training to organize in their church around growing food. This picture I wanted to highlight super quick because I wanted to explain why all the teeth are out of my mouth. I'm excited in this picture because this church in East Baltimore raised funds to build this infrastructure on their land so they could extend their growing season. Our organization chipped in with what the church already raised, and we were able to build this on their church land. It proved the concept that had been a wondering in my mind. Would churches be open to building agricultural infrastructure on their land? And this was the first time, not the last, but the first time a church helped to prove that concept. Here's a map of Baltimore. In addition to the frigid temperatures, we also have these red spaces on the map, and these are food priority areas. That's what the city of Baltimore calls them. Those of us in the food justice community, we call them food apartheid zones. Food apartheid zones. And these are the red spaces on the map. Every green circle is a church that we help to start growing food in their community. Check out where the green circles are and where the red spaces are. I pray that the next time you see me, the green circles will overtake the red because our work has been effective in organizing these anchor institutions of these churches. And then we have our soil to sanctuary market. Think farmers market inside of a church. That's basically what it is. We do it on Sundays when the congregation is already gathered for worship, because everybody knows that after church, everybody is hungry. So why not put the food right there in their face right after the benediction? And so that's what we do. We repurpose our marquee and use it as a billboard and promote our soil to sanctuary markets. And then we transform our multi-purpose room into a farmer's market. This is one of the young ladies of our church. She was 10 years old at the time of this picture. Her name is Naima, and she wanted to be a chef. And so our market gave her a chance to be a chef. I said, come on, Naima, just do what you do. Naima got so good, she started doing workshops at our markets, and all the members would stand around and watch her work. She was really good, so good that she became a child chef champion from Maryland, and then went to the Child Chef Championship on Bravo. She did not win the total competition, but we were so proud that this young lady, 10 years old, started cooking and doing her stuff right at our church, and then went to the big time, the national television. We even partner with other religious groups. This is the sisters from Muhammad Mosque here in Baltimore who came over to do a workshop in the kitchen. I love the picture because you got church mothers and Muslim sisters side by side learning about food and doing workshops together. Food has a way to bring folks together no matter the religious, ethnic, heritage, context, and I love that about food. Lastly, the Black Church Agriculture Program, Black Church Supported Agriculture Program. This is what we launched in the beginning months of the pandemic. We needed to create our own supply chain we saw that Black farmers were being left out of many of the contract opportunities, especially early on in the pandemic. And so we said, fine, let's create our own supply chain and prioritize Black farmers and buy from them in bulk. We helped Black churches to buy in bulk from Black farmers. We rented a truck. I drove the truck. My cousin Junebug drove the truck. We unloaded the truck. We brought it to the church, and the church would do its outreach to its community with the food from Black farmers. Black farmers got paid, and these communities got the nutrient-rich produce that they needed. Now, from 2015 to today, this is where we are around the country. These are our churches, Black farmers, and even partnering institutions like seminaries. And we are doing the work through network weaving to brick by brick, co-create these local, hyper-local miniature food ecosystems that connect like a grandfather clock and the gears kind of dance together. We think that's a more sustainable model, particularly given all of the challenges of our time. So here's what I do. This is my second to last slide, I think. Here's what I basically do. This is a picture of a food system. And I'm the one who's like letting my 5-year-old self out to keep on asking questions like what if and why. And this is what I'm doing. What if Black churches found a way, were guided to a way to connect to every part of the food system in a way that honored their agency, the voices of their communities, and embraced asset-based community development? We already have some stuff in our hand, y'all. How do we use it differently to further equity and justice in the food system? That's basically what it is that we're doing. In terms of some resources, if anybody wants to kind of check out more of these histories, these are some of my favorites. And now people who are part of my chosen family, people like Dr. Monica White, her dynamic book, Freedom Farmer, some of y'all have read it. It is a must read if you want to really get some deep history around asset-based community development, food sovereignty, and the Black freedom struggle fight. Dr. Ashante Reese is another one, Black food geography. She focused on DC in that book, but she has other books now that I want to commend to you. Leah Pennyman, Farming While Black. You better have this on your shelf if you try to do this food and health stuff. And then the bottom left corner, I'm a big proponent of asset-based community development. Listen, we don't need Wonder Woman, Superman, or messiahs to come out of the sky. We just got to look at ourselves, look at what we have, and look at ways that we can come together. The book in the bottom left corner is a great one, Building Communities from the Inside Out by Kretzmann and McKnight. And then just one more I'll lift out. Well, the Good Food book is there. That's a great one for theology. Any kind of religious folks on the line, you can check that one out. But a big one, Collective Courage by Jessica Gordon Nimhart is another great one. And I would invite your attention to that. African-American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. Well, that's all I have. I know that was like a whirlwind of stuff, y'all. So if you got other questions or anything, I'd love to stay connected. My email is there. My social media is on there, and QR codes if you want to just stay connected. I would love to stay connected. Thank you so much again for this awesome opportunity.
Wow, sorry, I needed a second. That was so wonderful, Dr. Brown. Thank you. I am also a big agricultural history nerd, and we've actually been talking a lot lately about the free breakfast program that the Panthers started. Wow, I need a second, but let me go ahead and have Laurie get started, and I'll get the slides back up for us. If you have questions, when Laurie's done, we're going to have a joint question and answer session. You'll be able to put them in the chat, or you'll be able to unmute yourselves and ask them. But now let's have Laurie. Give me just a moment.
Thanks so much, Jamie. And also thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Brown. That was so engaging, and I am nervous. I'm not going to come anywhere close to to being as informative and engaging as you are. And I'm just talking about boring law and resources. But a lot of what Reverend Dr. Brown, well, I should say, thankfully, we are really fortunate to have Reverend Dr. Brown on our advisory council for one of the projects that I'm going to talk about with you all, the Healthy Food Policy Project. But a lot of the issues that Reverend Dr. Brown highlighted, there are some law and policy implications to some of them, or at least organizations that are thinking about trying to create things in the food system, trying to be able to manage distribution and production, that unfortunately, there are often legal issues that arise in those contexts. So I, as the director of the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems, what we do at, oh, good. I was like, I'm not gonna get our mission right until it pops up on this screen. I'm definitely gonna mess it up. So Jamie, am I able to advance my slides, or do I need to have you do it for me?
Can you see the slides? We're
Yeah.
trying to figure out if, okay, is it on the right one?
Yes, it's on the perfect one. Thank you.
Perfect.
I just need to put my glasses on with my old eyes. So the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems, Paul mentioned earlier, we are part of the Ag Law Partnership with the National Ag Library, also with the National Agricultural Law Center. And because we're in a law school, we work with law students and master's students, and we try to train those students to develop real world solutions for a more sustainable and just food system. And the way that we do that is we work with project partners. Most times those are community organizations, nonprofit organizations, sometimes just producers. I shouldn't say just producers, sometimes producers and farmers that are seeking some law and policy advice related to some of the things that they're trying to accomplish. So as Reverend Dr. Brown was talking, I was just thinking about some of the issues that we work on and some of the issues that might come up for organizations like his that are trying to navigate some of these issues. Some of those that we've worked on are issues related to farmers markets, because surprisingly, there are things, or maybe not for some of you on the webinar, there are issues that come up related to liability, to governance. Since COVID, there have been a lot of questions about mask mandates, and are farmers able to mandate people wearing masks at the farmers market? Are there issues associated with that? So there are any number of issues that might come up in the farmers market context. There's zoning issues. So if an organization is thinking about having some sort of community garden, or they're thinking about creating a market wherever they're housed, there may be zoning issues or zoning restrictions in that community, and trying to think about how to deal with and address some of those to make the community more friendly for community agriculture. There's food safety issues. Those are a little bit less exciting, but just thinking about how to navigate some of the food safety challenges that some of these organizations might face, contracts issues, and then business entity formation. So just a few of those sort of popped into my mind as the Reverend Doctor was speaking, and thinking about how do we assist organizations in doing those things. So sometimes we work with individual organizations, and they have a specific legal question, and we help them answer that question. We try to take those opportunities to think about how we might be able to build a broader resource that could serve other organizations that might have similar problems. So that's essentially where our projects originate from. And so if you take a look on our site, you can see a number of different projects, and that's often those are coming out of organizations that have had an issue, and we then have created a resource out of them. One of the projects that I'm going to talk with you about did not originate in that way. It's sort of a bigger picture project that was a response to some calls that came from a group of leaders in the food system for a national food strategy. one of the critiques of that, and it was, they phrased it as a national food policy. One of the critiques of that was really that it was dictating what the substance of a national food policy should be in the United States. And so we were really interested and curious. I say we because we worked collaboratively with the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic. We also reached out to a number of people across the food system and a number of stakeholder organizations to get feedback and advice about the creation of our report, which was really thinking about what the process would look like to build a national food strategy in the United States. We released this first report in February 2017, and then we released an update to our report in October 2020 after the pandemic, given all of the food system challenges that were highlighted by the pandemic, and the fact that if we had an overarching national food strategy in place in the United States, maybe some of those challenges could have been easier to address. And maybe it would have been easier to think about solutions because there would have already been people sort of working together, working collaboratively, working at the state and local level, and working closely with state and local partners to think about how to resolve some of those challenges. We can go to the next one. Sorry, Jamie, I hate when I have to ask somebody else to do that. The Reverend Dr. Brown showed you all a picture of the food system. Here's another picture of the food system that's really similar. The reason that we created the blueprint for a national food strategy is that we have all these different points along the food system, but we have a whole complex web of laws and regulations, federal, state, local, that govern the food system. We also have a bunch of different government agencies dealing with the food system. We have foreign stakeholders, we have domestic stakeholders, we have community organizations. All of these different entities are either creating, advocating, working on policies that often conflict, or they create redundancies, or they decrease, or they increase inefficiencies or decrease efficiencies. And what we don't have in the United States is any sort of big picture mechanism or process or procedure to be able to think about how do all these different laws work together, or how could they work together? How could all these different agencies work together? How could things that are happening at the community level trickle up better to federal government so that we could better help to support things that are happening at the community level? So when we created this report, the piece of the report that I worked on was to look at some international strategies and to see how other countries had addressed some of these issues. And one of the countries that we found to be really instructional was Brazil. And what Brazil had done was basically create opportunities for the public to participate in policymaking at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. So at every level, there was broad public participation so that the policies that were being developed at the local level could easily trickle up to the state level, because you had a group of stakeholders from the public, so civil society, that was helping to participate in policy creation. That then also trickled up to the federal level. So at each level of government, you had citizens basically participating in the creation of food policy. And you had more coordination because each level of government was basically reporting to the other levels. And so there was a tremendous amount of coordination. There's a tremendous amount of participation. And we just don't have anything that's remotely similar to that in the United States. So we had a whole set of recommendations that we made with regard to what we think it would look like to have a national food strategy in the United States. One of the obvious ones is that we need more coordination across different agencies. So the big agencies that people think of are often USDA and FDA, but there's a whole host of other agencies that are involved in regulation of the food system. And there isn't any sort of, we have a bunch of different interagency working groups, but there isn't one sort of collective one that's just focused on the food system. Another big piece that we recommended was participation, and to think about how to achieve really meaningful participation. And not only that, but to think about how, when responding to public input about what we think the policies and priorities for the food system should be, to be really transparent about what the different trade-offs are in making one choice over another, and to take public input on those trade-offs so that there's a broad, transparent process where the public has the opportunity to see if this agency is going to make this decision over here, and that's going to impact something over here, that all of that is aired and that the public has the opportunity to weigh in on that and to give feedback and input on which of those things the public wants to prioritize. Accountability and transparency was another recommendation that we made. And then durability, to make sure that if a national food strategy was created, that there's periodic updating of it to reflect changing social situations, economic situations, technological advances, and that there's sort of consistent reviewing and reporting to make sure that it's actually working. And if it's not, to think about what we need to do to fix it and what we need to do to make that better. The one that I really want to focus in on is the participation piece. So what's really, I think what's really been brought to light over the past few years, and particularly during the pandemic, is the notion that there are a lot of community groups, there are a lot of local leaders that have a tremendous amount of expertise and perspective on what should be happening in the food system. And we don't see that reflected back up into federal policy. We also see the federal government often tapping, well now, certainly we have seen the federal government trying to tap into the expertise of these organizations and entities. Many of these organizations and entities are not as well resourced as the federal government. Their knowledge and expertise is really valuable. Their time is really valuable. They've been providing really critical feedback, particularly on equity issues. But what we need is an opportunity for there to be meaningful participation so that those people are compensated for their time, so that they are given the opportunity to actually shape policymaking and not just be advisors, but to enable them to be policymakers and to have the public have the opportunity to provide input. And as we seek input from stakeholders, to really think about how to meet stakeholders where they're at. One of the countries that we looked at was Canada. And when Canada was thinking about building their national food policy, for a number of the Indigenous groups that they were trying to get feedback from, the government was trying to think about, like, how can we organize listening sessions for you and yada, yada, yada. And what those groups said was, we don't want you to do that. What we want is funding to be able to organize our own listening sessions so that we can lead our own convenings. We will share that information with you, but we want to take control of that. And that was really instrumental. And it doesn't mean that every group is going to want to have the same, they're not all going to have the same demands, and everybody's not going to want to participate in the same way. But if government's truly interested in getting input from stakeholders, then government needs to think about how to meet stakeholders where they're at and to think about what it is that the stakeholders want to be able to provide feedback to government. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit because one of the big questions we get about advocating for a big picture national food strategy is, what does that mean for local policies? Like, if we have this big picture national food strategy, we've had so much innovation at the local level. If we have this big picture national food strategy, is that still going to leave space for all of these innovations to happen at the local level? And that's certainly the intention. The intention is that an overarching national food strategy would enable those innovations not only to continue, but to thrive, and also help to inform how we might change federal policy to better reflect some of those innovations and also to better support them. So as I mentioned earlier, the Reverend Dr. Brown is on our advisory council for the Healthy Food Policy Project. And the goal of the Healthy Food Policy Project, so this is a project we started many years ago, actually. And the goal of this particular project is to both identify and elevate local laws that seek to promote access to healthy food, but also help contribute to strong local economies and improved environment and health equity, with a focus on socially disadvantaged and historically marginalized groups. So this project acts as a sort of database and information hub for entities, groups, individuals that are trying to look for local level policies that help to achieve some of these goals. Obviously, it's up to a community to figure out for themselves what policies are going to work, what priorities they have, what food justice means to them, and what the things are that they want to be able to accomplish. So one aspect of this project is that we have a policy database that has cataloged a number of different policies from municipalities across the country. There's a few different case studies so that people can see some of these policies in action, try to see what they've accomplished. And then there's the food system crosswalk. There's also some really great resources on the site. We fully recognize that not everybody feels comfortable doing research like we do, which is legal research. And so we've tried to create some resources to help people figure out how to navigate the site, but also how to think about how to construct their own ordinances. And even more so before they get to that process, to think about how to authentically engage with residents to figure out what is it that you want to accomplish and how could you build an ordinance that could help you get there. So the one resource that's on, I just took a screenshot of this. One of the resources that's on this site is related to authentic resident engagement. And what does it mean to authentically engage with residents so that you're building inclusive food policies that recognize and pull in the expertise and the knowledge that's living within that community. So I think this is a really useful resource for anyone who's trying to think about, like, we know that in our community, there's this thing that we want to accomplish, and we think maybe there's a food policy that might help us accomplish that. This resource can help whoever that is, if it's an individual, if it's an organization, if it's a group, can really help them think about how to authentically engage the residents to start to build their own policy. And there's examples obviously on the site that people can look to from other places to help them think through what the language might look like. But also the next resource is a policy drafting companion guide, which really walks through how do you draft a policy. Again, we fully recognize that this is not something that's intuitive to everybody. So one of the things that I think has been really wonderful about the Healthy Food Policy Project is some of the curbside consulting that they've done, when people have come with actual real world questions. And some of the partners and individuals that I work with have provided some consulting services for people to think about how to build their policies. So this is the Healthy Food Policy Project is one resource. I thought it'd be a good one to highlight because the Reverend Dr. Brown has helped to contribute to this site. And it also brings things down to the local level. But some of the other issues that were brought up by the Reverend Doctor in his presentation related to farmland access. Our farmland access legal toolkit has a whole heirs property section that helps people think through heirs property issues. We're continuously trying to help build out that part of the site. We also have some resources that are focused on workers in the food system and trying to think about policies that can help to support better outcomes for workers in the food system, mostly focused on public health issues, and a whole range of other resources that I didn't pull into my slides because then I would have been talking for 6 more hours. So I think that is the end of my presentation. We are always happy if people want to reach out to us. We are always happy to chat. We're happy to talk through if you have law and policy questions. We're happy to talk those through. We have a clinic with students that work on specific legal issues with project partners that benefits the students because they can go out and do great work in the world. And if the partners are patient, it's a nice experience for the partners too. So thank you all. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
I'm going to stop sharing for now so we can move into our question and answer time. And I'm going to go pull a couple links to the Farmland Access Legal Toolkit. And then we also have a new heirs property page on the NAL website that links to the Farmland Access Legal Toolkit and other resources from CAFs, and then also has recordings from our last edit-a-thon about heirs property and links to our colleague Mavis and her great work with heir shares. So feel free to ask questions in the chat or unmute yourself and ask, whichever you'd like.
Jamie, can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was just going to say, if any of you have ideas for resources that would be beneficial for those of you who are out there, either working with entities in the food system or work in the food system yourself, and if there are resources that you all think would be valuable and useful to you, please let us know. We're always happy to hear from people about things. We want people to use our resources and for them to be helpful. So don't hesitate to reach out about that too.
USDA is an equal opportunity provider, employer, and lender.
A production of Creative Media and Broadcast Center, USDA Office of Communications, Washington, D.C.